No, not those 99 puppies. We're looking for 99 Dalmatian puppies. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about Disney's 1961 animated adventure film, 101 Dalmatians. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. 101 Dalmatians stars the vocal talents of Rod Taylor, Cate Bauer, and Betty Lou Gerson, and was directed by the team of Clyde Geronimi, Hamilton Luske, and Wolfgang Reitherman. Based on Dodie Smith's 1956 novel The 101 Dalmatians, it tells the story of Dalmatians Pongo and Perdita, who must rescue their stolen litter of puppies from the evil Cruella de Vil. There's certainly no shortage of animal movies in the Disney animated catalog. We've had dozens of them over the years, but it wasn't new for the studio even back in 1961. This wasn't even the first dog-centric movie Disney had done, with Lady and the Tramp predating it by 6 years. But in spite of this, 101 Dalmatians was, and still is, a very unique film for the studio. It was groundbreaking and marked a real turning point for Disney in terms of animation, music, genre, story structure, and a whole number of other things. I grew up during the heyday of the Disney Renaissance period, but even as a kid watching the older Disney films, this one always stood out as being something slightly different. Despite the absurdity of 99 puppies, this movie was grounded in a sense of reality. Now, I realize that might sound kinda weird considering this is a movie that features talking animals and a crazy woman trying to make a coat out of puppies, but that sense of reality stems from something other than the story itself. It comes from something deeper: the time period, the style, the whole world that the story's set in. The majority of Disney films that came before this were fairy tales. They were once-upon-a-time stories set off in faraway fantasy lands, or they were character-centric tales with the sort of timeless quality that makes their temporal setting impossible to pinpoint. 101 Dalmatians, on the other hand, felt like it was set in the real world. It felt modern and contemporary. Characters watched TV. There were game shows and commercials with ridiculous jingles. And that sort of contemporary feel extended beyond just the world that the film was set in, to, more broadly, the film itself. One great example of this is the music. Unlike nearly every Disney movie that came before it, this isn't a musical. Instead, the excitingly jazzy score serves as a more than capable substitute, providing a soundscape that hits all of the emotional beats that we would normally get from the music in a traditional musical. One of our main human characters, Roger, is a musician, so he does write and sing a song, but it's part of the story and not really in a true musical number kind of way. But despite that, the song he sings is arguably one of the most recognizable Disney songs, Cruella de Vil. But it was a pretty atypical song for a Disney movie. It didn't have that classic orchestral grandness to it. It was sort of bluesy instead. But man, is it catchy. Roger was right. Melody first. In addition to the music, the animation was a contemporary step forward, though this particular aspect was more a consequence of necessity than a conscious creative choice. At the time, the animation studio was bleeding money, so the new animation style was incorporated as a cost and time-saving measure. Rather than hand-inking each individual drawing, they used the newly developed Xerox method, which involved copying the artist's drawings directly onto the cells, bypassing the time-consuming inking stage. As a result, the animation in this film has a much more homemade, hand-drawn sort of sketchy look to it, rather than the more traditional, clean, sharp lines produced by the hand-inking process. Some people, including Walt Disney himself, viewed this as a step down in terms of the quality, but I think it imparts this warm, inviting nature to the film. It's charming, and in conjunction with the character designs and the almost abstract quality of the backgrounds, really gives this film a different visual flavor than any of its predecessors. 101 Dalmatians has a different story and tonal flavor to it too. Like I said before, even at the time, animal movies were nothing new, but setting an animal movie in this non-fairy tale, contemporary, real-world setting was new, as was combining it with the adventure, suspense, and caper elements. It's got human aspects, animal aspects, it's an escape movie, it's a rescue movie, it's a journey home, all of this packed into a meager 79 minutes. With a runtime that lean, you'd probably expect this to be a very tight, condensed movie, but it actually has some pacing issues. Much of the story runs pretty briskly, which works well considering there are so many chase sequences, but there are some moments in the interim periods that just drag on unnecessarily and feel more like filler than anything else. Most of the scenes with the Colonel fall into this category for me. Luckily, there are moments in this film that use their slow pace extremely effectively. This isn't intended to be a dark movie. There's quite a bit of humor, and then, of course, the absurdity of the plot and the whole 99 puppies thing. But I gotta say, watching as a kid, this was incredibly suspenseful. It was never exactly scary, but it definitely put me on edge. The puppies genuinely feel like they're in real danger, and there are moments where you're holding your breath hoping nothing happens to them. Slow, quiet scenes where the pacing enhances the story. For example, those moments where Cruella slowly drives by peering in the window still get my heart racing a bit. And that brings us to the most iconic character of the film, Cruella de Vil. She's such a unique villain, because she's pure evil, but there's this wacky, over-the-top quality to her that makes her almost funny in a weird way. Her character design, her car, and the way she drives, her ridiculous scheme, she's a complete caricature, but she is pure evil. She's not motivated by revenge or money or any of the other typical villain things. She literally just wants to make a fur coat out of puppies. There had been evil Disney villains in the past, but Cruella was the first of these truly evil characters that existed in our world. Characters like Maleficent were fairy tale villains, but Cruella could have been your next door neighbor. And even as a kid, that struck me as being a unique and slightly terrifying twist on the classic Disney villain. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number one has gotta be Cruella de Vil. She's such a memorable villain, cause that's all she is. A villain. There's no nuance to her, no redeeming qualities, no attempt at actually humanizing her. She's a caricature, over the top, ridiculous, but so evil. I mean, her plan was literally to kill almost 100 puppies because she wanted a spotted fur coat. The plan itself might sound absurd and cartoonish, and her very striking sense of style wasn't exactly typical for the day, but she was still grounded in the real world, making her a much more menacing threat for me than some fantastical villain from a fairy tale ever could be. The second pro is the animation. This was the first Disney feature film to extensively use the Xerox process, and while it was done in order to save time and money, I think the resulting animation was perfect for this story. Not only does this film prominently feature black and white characters, which contrasts nicely with the heavy black borderlines produced by this process, but it also imparts this charming quality to the art. Disney movies had always been hand-drawn before, but the inking process covered up the stray lines and sketchy quality of the sketches, making everything look a lot more clean and processed. Here, those imperfections come through, only further reinforcing that this isn't your typical Disney fairy tale. Pro number 3 is the music. When you're thinking of a typical Disney animated film, you're thinking of a musical, a movie where characters randomly break out into song and dance throughout the story. But that's not what we have here with this movie. Instead, we have a film that's largely driven by its score, utilizing musical cues to evoke emotion and qualities like suspense, rather than relying on songs to verbalize these emotions. We do, of course, have the classic Cruella de Vil song, but rather than having, say, the puppies break out into the song, it's incorporated into the story as a piece of music written by Roger, who's a musician. And yeah, it's an example of a song that verbalizes how evil Cruella is, but it's not really the words that stick with you here. It's the melody. On the con side, my only real issue has to do with the pacing. This movie's less than 80 minutes long, so it should be a very breezy experience. But instead, it's plagued by the stop and start staccatoed pacing. That works to an extent when we're talking about, say, a scene that's slow and suspenseful because we've got puppies sneaking around, and then we cut to a chase sequence that's very fast. But the stop and start aspect isn't only used in that way. We've got a lot of scenes that, despite being in such a short film, drag on for way too long. I love the concept of the twilight bark, but it goes on way longer than it should, and really, most of the scenes involving the Colonel, I think, slow things way down and take away from the main storyline. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying 101 Dalmatians or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm going to give 101 Dalmatians 3.5 out of 5 paws. It's got an interesting story full of cute puppies, an iconic and memorable villain, and uses a groundbreaking animation style that paved the way for dozens of films to come. I would recommend 101 Dalmatians to people who want a solid, non-fantasy Disney animal film. It's not a musical and doesn't have the smoothness in its animation that the previous films had, so that might turn some people off, but it manages to offer a sort of contemporary real-world feeling that we hadn't gotten previously with the studio. And if you like Disney villains, it's hard to go wrong with Cruella. If you liked 101 Dalmatians, I would recommend the 1996 live-action adaptation, 101 Dalmatians. This was only Disney's second ever live-action remake of one of their own animated films, and came before the current boom of such films. Glenn Close stars as Cruella de Vil and is wickedly good. If you want another good dog-centric Disney animated feature, you should check out Lady and the Tramp. It's another Silver Age Disney film, but it has some of the more traditional qualities, like hand inking and musical numbers. Plus, we get cameo appearances from most of the Lady and the Tramp dogs during the Twilight Bark sequence here. And if you want another animal-centric Disney film featuring a kidnapping plot, you might want to watch Oliver and Company, which is a loose adaptation of Charles Dickens's Oliver Twist. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen 101 Dalmatians? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, who do you think is the most memorable Disney villain? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe while you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainely Movies, the way life should be.